welcome today from the Transformative Play Initiative at Uppsala University. We are so excited today to have Katrin Geneuss here with us, who is going to be speaking about educational role-playing, which I know a lot of you are really excited to hear about as well. My name is Sarah Lynn Bowman, and I work at Uppsala University's Campus Scotland in the Department of Game Design, where the Transformative Play Initiative is housed. Although really the way that we see this is more of a movement, a kind of bringing together of people who are all doing like-minded sort of work, using role-playing as a vehicle for change. All right. Wow, I had the pleasure of not only co-hosting a small workshop with Katrin where we talked about EduLarp, but also being able to interview her for a project that I'm doing. And I just was so inspired learning about all the different types of games that she's run over the years in her work. And I really am very happy to that she'll be able to share that with you as well today. So here's the official bio. Katrin Geneuss is a professor at interim in the Faculty of Teacher Education at the Department for German Language and Literature at Siegen University in Germany. Moreover, she is a guest researcher at Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität Munich at the Research Center for Values Education. She holds a PhD with an empirical study of modeling EduLarp as a drama tool in German lessons. Her main focus in research and teaching are hybrid learning arrangements applied in language teaching. Prior to working at Siegen University, Katrin worked as a teacher and lecturer in Uppsala, Sweden, at Ludwig-Maximilians University, and at Wurzburg University. And so with that, I will hand it over to you, Katrin.
Thank you so very much, Sarah, for this introduction, and thank you for having me, for hosting me and my team's work. So I really would invite you to join me here when I share my slides and take you to the lecture to play or not to play for the next 60 minutes. I'm going to take you to the classrooms that we've been working in with the students, with their teachers. It was lots of experimental work, but also like a long and slow process of research behind the scenes. To make a long story short, these are the questions that we've been trying to answer throughout the past 5-6 years. Can EduLarp be applied in schools? What are the effects on students and what are the challenges? And just in case you don't have 90 minutes tonight, let me give you the quick answers. Yes, EduLarp can be applied in schools, at least in German schools. I have to add that because we've only been doing our research in southern Germany. I would say from my experience that it could be applicable to other schools in other countries, but well, that would be due to further testing, of course. What are the effects on students? Here, the short answer is we don't really know. And why that is, I will tell you in the lecture. And what are the challenges? Well, in schools, there are restrictions of place and time. And since we can't really tell what skills are being improved, like we don't really know how to verify these effects, that is something that clashes a little bit with schools, but there are solutions. So I'll be happy to take you with me on that journey that we embarked 6 years ago, and to tell you more about the answers to those questions. And I mean, you might be wondering, that is a long time for very little answers. Yeah, and that's research. And yet we had a lot of fun and we had a lot of in-between results. And in today's lecture, I'm not only going to talk about that research, I'm also going to show you some examples of EduLarps, of live role-playing games that we have designed and conducted in the classrooms. I'm going to show you the design and facilitation principles that we have deducted from our results. Then there will be yet another example of an EduLarp called Accused. And if time, after showing you where you could read more about our research, I would take you to the party, one of our most recent hybrid EduLarps. All right. So as Sarah just said, my academic journey has taken me to different universities, but also to several countries. And I actually, my whole EduLarp journey started off in Sweden when I got in touch with Live Verkstan, a company designing and facilitating EduLarps in schools and for other school activities as well. And they have dozens of years of experience, and just seeing what they were doing in Swedish classrooms, since I was working as a teacher there, I got so inspired and curious, like, what is that thing they call EduLarp? Like, I had never heard of it. I'm not a LARPer myself, but I'm a passionate drama teacher. So I was very curious, started investigating, embarked on a PhD, and then I built, it's not a company, but it's a group of people, just as Live Verkstan. We go out to the classrooms, design LARPs, and conduct them in the classrooms with the teachers. And this is called Star Manufacture. And you'll be seeing many members of my wonderful team tonight on the photographs. And what we are doing, since that term EduLarp is so difficult, and to German ears, they can really get sweaty just because it's so alien. I decided, and I will be talking more about that, I decided to call it STARS, Student Activating Role-Playing Games, just because role-playing games is something that teachers can relate to. That's something they're doing. And then stars, like being a star, you know, everybody's active, everybody's in the limelight. So that should be the connotation of it. And then at Siegen University and LMU, I had my research being implemented in both my teaching and my development activities. Okay. So to start off with the terminology and similar techniques, there are many similar techniques, and sometimes you would hear that EduLarp is an innovative technique. Well, it is as much as process drama, simulation global, Planspiel, like strategic simulation games, or theater of the oppressed. I mean, those have been there for decades, but not forever, and especially not forever in classrooms. I think what makes EduLarp a bit special compared to these four that I just mentioned is that EduLarp has its origin in tabletop role-playing games and is therefore connected to a different community than Auguste Dubois' Theater of the Oppressed, Heathcote and Gavin's process drama, or other strategic simulation games. However, EduLarp is a very open concept. And if you saw one of the one of those aforementioned games in a classroom, you would not be able to tell, like, is that an EduLarp? Is that something else? You know, because edges are not really very cut and clear. Yet there are some distinctive features to EduLarp, and there is the so-called unique setting point. And it's not just one feature that is that unique setting point, but it's where all of these get together. We have quite a long role-playing phase, which is most of the times uninterrupted. Everybody present is in character, usually. We have setting, characters, and the plot, and in an EduLarp, we meet physically. We do not just sit at a table, usually, but we stand up, interact, and act as these characters. Then, quite importantly, in an EduLarp, there are preset learning goals. Because in some of these other, the previously mentioned techniques, the process might be the learning goal itself, but in an EduLarp, usually you set the learning goals in the very beginning, then you design your LARP, cross-check all the time, what do these scenes really add to the learning objectives? And then in the reflection, you tie to those learning objectives again. There is a preparation and reflection, so it's like a 3-step technique. And of course, there are certain rules, and most importantly, respect and on par interaction. And this might, all of this might apply to other techniques as well, but from what I learned in my research, talking to experts who have been dealing with EduLarp for a long time, this is what makes it really special, that all of these usually apply to EduLarps. And when you take this system to classrooms, they meet mandatory participation. EduLarp meets grading practices, hierarchies, group dynamics, and social roles, a curriculum, as well as space and time constraints. And this is where it gets difficult, because usually in LARP, in live role-playing games, you assume that people participate voluntarily, and they always are free to step out of the game whenever they feel it's too much. And of course, there should never, ever be anyone telling them whether they're doing a great job, a semi-good job, or not a good job at all. Well, hierarchies and group dynamics, yes, they do exist. So that is well known from any social context, but also having a curriculum and a teacher who is in charge of meeting curricular goals, that is special. And space and time constraints, especially in Germany, we have 45-minute slots, and they have to be considered, right? We cannot just pretend they don't exist. So in order to answer our question, can EduLarp be applied in schools? We have to find solutions for these, for this framework. And here is how we solved it. As of the space and time constraints, we said that any of our games can be conducted by one single teacher in one classroom within 4 lessons. So 4 times 45 minutes. When it comes to grading practices, we asked the teachers not to grade the EduLarp performance at all. All students would get feedback on their performance, mostly like a very positive feedback, of course. But also we had classes where they played up to 5 EduLarps throughout 1 year, and then they would get feedback over of how they developed and the personal progress. As of the curriculum, whenever we designed an EduLarp, our learning objectives were extracted from that curriculum. And every phase of the unit is cross-checked for its contribution to achieving these goals. Participation is mandatory. Well, it is mandatory in schools, yet we always designed for inclusion and opt-out mechanisms. So any student should at all times feel safe to say, whoop, this is too much for me. I'll have to step back a little bit. I'll observe, I'll watch, and whenever I feel like it, I get back in. And we had to convince the teachers at first that this was something that would be possible, and it was. We never had any student like opting out 100%, like not wanting to join or even disrupting the game. That never happened. But we did have some who felt at times, okay, I'm making use of my opt-out mechanism, and then they would rejoin again. And knowing this from the very first minute gave them a feeling of safety and ownership. Respect is a hard rule. And of course, there are hierarchies, group dynamics, and whenever teacher and students meet, even though everybody is character in a role, there still is some hierarchy. We cannot do anything against that. So we just accepted it, but we told everyone present that just for today, they would meet as their characters. And that actually broke up the hierarchies of the group dynamics that we had, but more about that later when I get to the results. So this is how we designed our games. We, as soon as we went out and talked to the teachers, asked whether we could facilitate some EduLarps in their classrooms, we realized, well, structures are required. Everybody's asking, like, when are you doing it? How long is it gonna take? What are the goals? Okay, so we could answer to that. Concise descriptions were required. So we could not make a long story, go back to a LARP and role-playing and the open method. They really wanted to know what is it and what is it not. So we delivered that, and learning objectives required. And this concise description is another reason for me choosing the term STARS instead of EduLarp, because from my previous research and the interviews that I had conducted with EduLarp experts, I realized that EduLarp is very open and it's work in progress, you know, and it would, and that is part of its definition. At the same time, it's impossible to go to a school and ask for doing a very open thing and you don't know. So yeah, you understand me. So I had to limit it a bit, getting a bit closer to traditional role-playing techniques that teachers might know. And then whenever we had a class where we conducted a second and a third game, we could be more open and more experimental and getting closer to that concept of LARP being a technique where you really get to explore edges. So what we always try to keep to any of our games in the design was the immersion, the creativity, and the social, physical, emotional, and cognitive dimensions. And then we had this very confined frame. It was curriculum-based. The time frame was 45 minutes preparation, 90 minutes the game itself, and 45 minutes reflection. Plus, I need to add that we would always give teachers additional materials on how to work with the EduLarp later on. But these 45, 90, and 45 minutes were the lessons that me and my team actually spent in the classrooms. It would be possible to conduct the EduLarps in the classrooms. In one classroom could be possible, but usually we asked for a second one, just, you know, in case we would have scenes in different places. So, and that usually would work. One or two teachers as facilitators would be a maximum. We did not ask for any drama, like previous drama skills, and no prerequisites, no stage, and no costumes. Sometimes we would bring some props and like minor, like very reduced costumes. You will see that in the photographs later. And we, as facilitators, we usually had some kind of costume. You'll also see that in a bit. And this is what I just explained, the 3 phases. And in the preparation, we would talk about the scenario. The kids would develop the characters. Usually they would get a very short character description with the possibility of like expanding on the characters themselves in order to create ownership. We would have improvisation exercises and even rehearse safety and meta techniques and tell them, and that is super important. Of course, they would be asked like, why are we doing this? Is it really necessary? Do we have to? And then we would tell them the learning objectives and why we thought that just EduLarp would be a good technique to get there. Usually the day after, we would have the role playing itself. First, quickly introduce to the rules, like especially remind them of being respectful towards each other. And then we would not interrupt them for the 80-minute LARP. And then we would have a very short, like a super short debrief where we separate the players from characters, usually by taking off their costumes, saying goodbye to the characters. And then in the next lesson, either the same day or the next day, we would have a debrief, like emotionally, how did it feel? What was your best moment? What did you dislike? A reflection in terms of content, and then tie the role-playing experience to their realities. Like maybe even to their everyday life. And then finally come with the curriculum and transfer the experience to the learning goals. And this is where you can see me and Carola and Sebastian from my team there. We are about to start the LARP. The class is still outside having a break, but soon they will enter and then the whole thing will start. And this is for the EduLarp King that I will be introducing you to in a little bit. Before I do that, let's have a look at the research. Everything I'm telling you now, you can find in the International Journey of Role-Playing. It's an article published last year called The Use of the Role-Playing Techniques Stars in Formal Contexts. And that's just a short summary. We had 16 EduLarps. And we played several of these EduLarps several times in different classes with different groups to see how they would be working. So we had 53 cycles in total out of these 16 EduLarps. We made sure that we tested the EduLarp technique with all ages and all types of schools, that we had a broad range of topics, and that we would always follow the design principle of one pedagogue and one classroom. For the testing, we would be more people, but then the scripts would end up being so reduced that one pedagogue could facilitate one EduLarp in one classroom. Because our idea was, and still is, to have like an EduLarp library one day where teachers just go, grab a LARP and play it with their classes. And then, of course, since teachers are super busy people, it has to be, they have to be able to understand it at one glance. What is it about? What do I have to do? Okay, and these, just to show you the 16 LARPs, these are the titles, and today I will be showing you these 3. And you can see here that these are the age ranges. So we started with 8-year-olds, and then we even had 14 plus. 16-year-olds we also had here. Okay. So how did I go about in the very beginning? I talked to EduLarp experts from all over the world, some of whom are here today, and I'm still forever grateful because they explained me the concept of EduLarp, and they really shaped like a whole universe of what LARP can be. And then I understood that, and my team and me, we wrote those LARPs that I just showed you. And some of those EduLarps were also written by Live Verkstan, the Swedish team that I told you about, since they had that great experience and they already knew what would be working and what wouldn't. And they wrote several of the games. And after the games, we would conduct interviews with the teachers. We would have feedback talks with the students, and also surveys filled in by the students. So we had, it's both qualitative research and quantitative, some statistics in those surveys. Just to show you the amount of material that we gathered, it was 12 experts, 7 teachers, and 161 students, and about 60 students that we had the feedback talks with. And these are some quotes that the experts told me. So you always have to tie it to life reality of the kids. The language skills are going to increase phenomenally. It's a good way of testing oneself in a safe environment, and it's a fun way of learning. So knowing that, we developed the design-based research. I'm not going to go into that model too much because I'd rather take you to the classrooms now. So from what I had learned from the experts, we designed the EduLarps striving towards these goals. So in terms of content, we took that from the curricula, and we wanted to, in some cases, teach them facts, engage for the topic, apply knowledge that they already had gained, and we wanted to give them new perspectives on some topics. Performative skills would be trained, creativity, teamwork, empathy, and personal skills would also be developed. Like some students even expressed that they really gotten to know themselves better, what they could do, what they liked to do. As of communication, we had verbal, non-verbal, and paraverbal goals, different registers in language. For example, when they had characters like grown-up characters, they would speak differently from what they would be speaking in everyday life. And we would also train spontaneous interaction, which to today's digital natives is quite a thing, actually. like standing in front of each other and communicating face to face. And on top of that, as a character. So that would be something we would train for. And then also in terms of the goals from the area of values education, we would train respect, responsibility, tolerance, appreciation, and democratic structures. And this is another article from the Scenario magazine, which has, as the title, we chose a quote of a student who said, "I've gained self-confidence." Because in these feedback talks, we asked them, what did you learn? Have you, like, in terms of transformation, have you realized anything that is different now than before? And this person said, yes, I've gained self-confidence. In the surveys, they mostly said that they had learned content-related issues, that they had learned something about values, their performance, language. So, and this is how they perceived their own learning. And this is actually something that we were just about to do when Corona came. We wanted, like, in order to test how much content can we actually convey in LARPs, we would have to have 2 classrooms and try to strive towards the same learning goals with different methods. We were about to do that, and then Corona hit and we couldn't do it anymore. So we will be looking deeper into the content-related learning. Another quote of a student, 12 years, "I know now that I'm capable of much more than just sitting on a chair and listen to the teacher." So again, like personal skills, self-confidence, and the teacher's perspectives are also interesting. If you look at the bubbles here on the right, so according to teachers, they felt that EduLarp was a really good tool to enhance performance skills, empathy, showing different perspectives on one topic, but also social skills and teamwork. Since we conducted this study in German lessons, where it's a lot about language and literature, in terms of language learning, teachers felt that it was a really good tool to motivate writing activities, since the students were having they were not only having fun, but they actually were immersed in a story, were telling a story together, and then for the writing, they had a lot to talk about. So that would motivate writing and also speaking interaction. And yet, so summarizing, teachers felt, yes, it's a meaningful tool to treat curricular topics. The students felt, yes, I'm learning a lot, like social and personal skills. Yet there are many challenges that keep educators from applying the technique. Some of them, this is actually what the teachers mentioned and which we summarized. So we call it infrastructure. It's the time and place confinement, because after LARP, after these 90 minutes, most of them felt like, what, do we have to stop already? Like, we want to continue. And everybody wished, like teachers and students, like everybody wished for more time, which we didn't have. Another problem is verifying the effects. Like, how do you actually see that they're learning something? Because grades might not be getting better next week just by having attended a few EduLarps. So that would be something to look into. Then, according to teachers, they felt that they lost track of how much students were participating. Since teachers were participating themselves, they could not really observe the students. So they felt a bit of losing control here. And then the diversity, the heterogeneity of the students, that some were really engaged, others were less. They felt that that could be problematic. And the same goes for reflection, that some students were really engaging in the reflection while others were a bit quieter. Yet, if I can add that from my perspective, I think what we're seeing here is something that just is very tangible in LARPs. Not everybody is participating when you're reading a text or writing an essay, right? Somebody's writing more, somebody else is writing less, but in a LARP, it gets more obvious and tangible. And then teachers saw most problems in their own role. They saw that it was quite a lot of preparation, no matter how much we reduced the LARP script and how much we reduced on props and costumes, they still felt, whoa, that is quite a lot to prepare. Then the facilitation, which goes together with role taking, they are already having a certain role as a teacher in a classroom, and then swapping that for a character in a game, they felt that that was quite a challenge. And then to tackle the different students with their needs and wishes, that was quite a challenge as well. Finally, let's go to the classroom where we conducted King, a wonderful EduLarp written by my colleague Jannika Hilgers. Oh, sorry. And the learning objectives are the appreciation of the learner's various first languages, and to understand the linguistic diversity, to understand that they are speaking so many different languages, because the target group were learners as a foreign language of mixed ages. They had all been to Germany for no longer than half a year, and they had no common language. So they were all learning language at the same time as they were already engaging in different subjects. And the word fields that we were focusing were multilingualism, grocery shopping, and fairy tales. Competencies: creative, social, interactive, physical, cognitive, verbal, and non-verbal interaction. So, but let's keep in mind that the appreciation of the learner's various first languages were in the very center of the curricular learning. And in this game, we have one village. In this village, we have 4 families. All family members work in 3 factories, and the narrative time span is 3 days. There is a king, a wise lady, and servants. And these were the characters that we would be embodying. And we had in the game, we had one problem. The problem being, should we speak one language or rather a multitude of languages? The king would want to speak one language because he only knew German. And the wise lady, she felt, oh, there are several reasons for maintaining the multitude of languages and for speaking them and for learning from each other all these languages. So we get into the classroom, and this is the teacher attending as well. And then again, me, Sebastian, and Carola. Sebastian as a king, he was introducing the concept and the learning goals. And Carola is now showing everyone the village, what it looks like. together with the German words. And we had rearranged, no, we had not rearranged the classroom, not yet, but it's important to see that we have houses for the families, marketplace in the middle, and then the king to the upper left, and then the factories. Students would get their characters, just names, and then they were asked to rearrange classrooms. And in the reflections and surveys, we learned that like rearranging furniture is one of their favorite things to do. Like almost in every LARP, we would get some feedback on rearranging furniture. So this is what they were doing, you know, building the factories, building the houses, and then they would get a family tree with where they filled in their names. They would be speaking about the constellations in their family, and thereby learning that vocabulary as well. And then we had some pre-LARP activities for building, for trust building, and also for rehearsing some meta techniques and safety techniques, like opting out. And these, I told you, they would get minimal costumes, and this is what they got, like this white stripe of cloth. And each family would just wrap it around themselves in a specific manner so that everybody else would know, oh, okay, they belong to one family. And this is how we started the game. We built a gate, then each pair would go through the gate, and once everybody had done that, the LARP started. And that day, we actually had preparation and the game on one day. This is the factory, and they would start off slowly. Like we also learned that it's really good when we include some traditional learning methods in the LARPs, like reading and writing activities. They were already in character, but they were doing like a domino and filling in some text. And then the wise lady would come, you know, she was at the marketplace selling her groceries, and being a bit sneaky and telling them, what, the king only wants you to speak one language. No, you shouldn't be doing that. And then she was also talking to the king. And the king proposed, okay, let's have a battle. I will try to speak some language, and you will have to convince me of how many languages you can speak. And in the families and the factories, they were teaching each other their languages, like which they really spoke in real life. And the king would not be too happy to see that, because of course he would realize, oh no, if they continue doing that, I'm going to lose. So he tried to be really angry and not let them do that. And then we have the counter movement, the wise lady who really encouraged them. Yes, do so, do so. So this is actually, I don't have too many pictures of the LARP itself because we didn't want to disturb too much by taking pictures. But this is actually the whole game, you know, like these two forces, these like force and counter force, king and wise lady. And in the end, of course, the students won. You see here, the wise lady is super enthusiastic. Since they won and the king agreed to having a multitude of languages in his village, they had a party and they bought groceries, which were mainly candy and soft drinks, from the wise lady, and they had to interact verbally here. We had a short debrief and reflection, everyone taking off their costumes and thanking everybody else. And saying just how they felt. I always call that a Swedish round, just because the concept is that everybody gets to say how they feel, and this is not to be commented on. not by the teacher, not by anybody else. So they just listen and they learn that, okay, people are feeling differently about this, and that's perfectly okay. And then we left and came back for the reflection and for learning how they perceived their various languages they had in the classroom. And so many students said, wow, I never knew what other languages people were speaking. I only knew that everybody was really poor in speaking German, but now I know that there's such a variety, and it sounds so great. And I myself learned different phrases or words. So we were really happy, and the teacher also affirmed that we had reached the learning goals for this. So in a sense, this is the perfect setting for implementing an EduLarp that we had at the school. We had curious and brave teachers and students. None of them had ever LARPed or EduLarp before, but they did, and they did it with a lot of curiosity and fun. We had a good atmosphere and a positive attitude towards one another, which created a safe environment. And I think the safe environment can really be created by giving the teacher lots of information that they recognize. So knowing, okay, this is adapted to our time frames, adapted to the curriculum, that safety, that gives, implies some safety on the teacher, which in turn makes students feel safe. In the perfect setting, we always communicate clearly the learning objectives prior to the EduLarp and how the EduLarp contributes to accomplish them. We had enough time for reflection and the willingness to embrace ambiguities. The design and facilitation principles that we could deduce from this EduLarp and all the other games were as follows. The ones highlighted in red are the ones that are important in terms of safety, but everything else is equally important. So it is important to communicate the method choice and the learning goals, and to let everybody know, also the teachers, that there is some degree of voluntariness. Because if you don't feel at ease with what you're doing, that negative feeling might actually have an impact on your attitude towards the subject itself, towards the class, towards the teacher. So it might have lots of negative side effects. So it's definitely super important to open up for opt-out techniques and voluntariness. And these require training. Students are not used to saying, ooh, this is too much for me. I really would not want to participate. So it has to be trained, and it can be done easily. There are we have come up with several 5-minute exercises for that. It's also important to let everybody know that varied feedback is appreciated, that and that the live action role-playing itself is either framed by traditional learning tools, as I showed you before, or that some traditional learning tools are in the game itself, so they can recognize that, and that also augments their safety. It's important to vary the constellations, to have group work in different constellations. So in our example, the families would live together in their houses, but in the factories, they would work in different constellations. And also levels of intensity should vary. Always designed for a positive experience, of course. I mean, we have games where basically everybody dies, but still it could be a positive experience. It should be. And that is really important. Limit on material props and costumes, and repetitions are advised, because when the teachers and students, like when they play their first EduLarp, they might feel a bit insecure, not knowing, oh, am I doing what this team of people wants me to do? And then once they have played their first EduLarp, they understand, well, whatever I'm doing is right, and they want me to own my character. So repetitions are definitely advised, because for the second, third, and so on LARPs, they will feel much safer and will expand more on characters and interaction. For designing the characters, we noticed that short descriptions of characters and inclusive names were important. Constellations should be inclusive and preset. So rather than saying, oh, find some people that you would like to be in your family, you tell them which characters are one family. We also found that fictional and younger characters are tricky, and that the facilitator's character, as well as the teacher's character, they should be low-key, and the students should be in the limelight. Respect is a hard rule. I've said that several times. All participants are on par. And yeah, of course, when you have 32 kids in one classroom, it may get very noisy and loud. So it's important to find meta techniques, or to script the game in a way that it is easy to restore the focus. And our best practice, I might actually close with this and not go further than that. So our best practice for before, during, and after the game is as follows. Before the game, it's really good to define and discuss the teaching goals. It's a bit of a repetition to what I've said before, but it's more concise and at one glance. Train gestures, communicate rules and opt out, and train for constructive feedback, because they might not have learned that. And of course, communicate the learning objectives. This is very practical now, like to prepare, delete all sources of irritations. Like we had, it says phones switched off. Okay, that's usually the case in classrooms, but we had so many people knocking on doors for whatever reasons, you know, and not because we were noisy or disturbing, but just, you know, somebody wanting to say hi, or somebody delivering a letter, whatever. So it's good to have some sign on the doors and the curtains closed, because things might be going on in the courtyard, and then everybody's forgetting about the EduLarp. Yeah, from these points, yes, acting character, of course. And for the teachers, we always ask them as facilitators to take the game seriously, but act joyfully. Like, of course, if they're having fun, everybody else dares to have fun as well. And sometimes students would like test them and leave their character and address them with the real teacher name. But then we always encourage them to stay in character. And just by staying in character, giving a signal that, whoop, no, this is not like regular lesson, we are somewhere else now. And by making mistakes, show how to embrace them. And if the teacher dares to make mistakes, or dares to laugh at his own interaction, then students would dare to do the same thing. And that last point here is a bit scary for teachers. It says, if allowed or possible, leave smaller groups unattended for short periods of time to let them take responsibility. So in our case of King, he would be leaving the classroom and the wise lady would follow, and the students were all by themselves. They would continue, they would stay in character and realize, wow, it's up to us. Like nobody is telling the story for us. We are supposed to tell our own story now. And that really, again, gave them ownership. And they grew by the responsibility and by the trust that they were given. I've talked about the after the EduLarp. And I would have the example accused. Well, I'll just quickly show you what it's about, because it's a different setup, different from King. And Accused has been written by Leif Werkstam. And for this EduLarp, the curricular learning objectives were social structures in the Middle Ages. They were supposed to learn historical language, so the vocabulary of German at that time, some of that. And they had been reading a novel, Oscar and the Secret of the Kids That Disappeared. And they were supposed to draw parallels. In the novel, there is one child being abducted by a poor family. And in general, we wanted them to empathize with the protagonist and have a change of perspective. We had one class of 12-year-old students in a lesson of German. And this Accused is one of the games that we've played over and over and over again in different classes with the different groups. The first scene is about 3 families which accuse peasants and poor families of theft, child abduction, witchcraft, and insults. The mayor is the judge. And what you're seeing here are the emblems of the family. So they are very wealthy families, and they always assist each other in accusing by pretending to having witnessed what has happened. And in fact, like that was on the character sheet, like on the background story of the families, they might not really have seen any signs of witchcraft. Maybe it was just the lady picking flowers, but they still felt we have to accuse that person. To show how powerful we are. As a next scene, they win in court. The judge tells them, yes, we're going to send all these families to jail that you've just been accusing. So they are super happy over the triumph, and they have a party at the mayor's house with food and snacks. You see, it's again food and snacks. And we also learned that this haptic, sensorial experience really adds to the students' experience in an EduLarp. And then they also learned during that feast that the persons they accused are in jail together with their families, and they have to pay huge sums of money. They party on until they suddenly get a slip of paper with their new character, and that comes quite as a surprise. Now they are a member of the family they just accused. They learn about their perspective and the motivations for their crime, right? The witchcraft, the child abduction, and the theft and lies we also had. And that they never ever wanted to commit any crime. They would not even perceive that as having done anything criminal, but yet now they were in jail. And since they were really poor, they didn't have any money for an attorney. So they would draw a lottery. Before drawing lottery, they in that scene, they would try to get out of jail by bribing the guard, by bargaining the few possessions they had, or by trying to escape. None of that helped, so they would draw a lottery about their fate, what happened to them. Some succeed in escaping, but they perish in the woods or die from diseases or hunger. Some succeed to escape and they get their reputation restored. Some fail, remain in jail but survive. Some fail, remain in jail and do not survive. And since I was talking for a positive experience, since it's a lottery and it was so random, everybody realized, wow, this is so unfair. If you were poor at that time, there was just no way of getting a fair verdict and judge, or at least not even of raising my voice. I would not even be allowed to tell my story. And that was part of what we want, like the social system during the medieval ages. And just an example of how we tied this game to their realities. We put up these sentences on the board. Recently, I insulted somebody. I've been insulted recently myself. When I see somebody being insulted, I take action and I treat everybody with respect. And then we ask them to consider whether any of these utterances applied to themselves. They were giving like little red dots and were asked to pin those dots to the sentence that they felt applied to themselves. And that's what they did. And we can see clearly here that when only very few people would intervene or interfere whenever they saw that an unfair situation was taking place. So they reflected on that, because we all know that this is what's most effective in conflicts and in mobbing situations. And they also discussed a lot about these two conflicting utterances. I treat everybody with respect. Many of them said they would be doing that, but also many said, I just insulted somebody recently. And then they would explain, yeah, well, at home with my sister, my brother, we communicate by insulting each other. But there are other insults. So that is still like treating them respectfully. So we had an interesting discussion about that. Yeah, and here we are again. Can EduLarp be applied in schools? Yes, it can. We have to reduce its openness, and then it can very well be applied. But I recommend, as of now, it be applied by external teams, just because we're seeing that also teachers are so much enjoying when somebody from the outside comes into the classroom and does this activity with their kids, because they get to see their students in a whole new setting, interacting differently. Sorry, I'm over time. I will be closing shortly. What are the effects on students? We will be looking more into that in our research. And the challenges are, as you've heard the system in terms of space and time confinements, and actually verifying the results. Did that EduLarp really lead anywhere, and where did it lead to? But we are getting closer here. We had, for example, one teacher that said, well, through this experience, through immersing in a story, their writing is getting so much more detailed. Not only is their motivation higher, but also like when writing about the characters in Accused, for example, they can really express their feelings better by taking their perspective. So, this is the further reading. And in these articles, of course, you will find references to the amazing work that I'm standing on, that my research is standing on. There have been several great, wonderful studies that helped us putting together everything that I was telling you about today. So, to mention our photographer, Jannica again, for designing King, LiveX done for Accused, and the party, well, we'll save that for some other time. And if you ever want to get in touch, I would be super happy. Katrin Geneuss at LMU Munich University, where I'll be starting in 2 days. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll be glad to engage in discussions and to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much. That was so lovely and so delightful to see the images as well. I think sometimes this can feel so abstract, and having like the tangible, this is what it actually looks like in the classroom, can be helpful. I also think sometimes when people think of LARP, we assume it has to be like a huge production in order for it to work. And as we can see, maybe it just needs a white sash and then they feel like they're in character. So it's really great to see that. Okay, we have some questions coming in. When talking about design principles, you mentioned inclusive character constellations. Could you clarify what you mean by that?
Yes. Just to stick to the example King, because I've talked about that before. We don't know the students before. The teacher would, but we don't. So we don't know who in these groups might want to engage more in a character, who might want to step a bit towards the background. So we gave them this family tree, and then they could choose themselves, like, am I the father or the mother in the family, who might also worry about which meals to cook and so on, so they would engage more in the game? Or am I maybe some granny or grandfather in the background that just is more observant and maybe supporting? So we would consider that, like how much they engage in the games that they could choose. And also inclusive characters. Yeah, well, it starts with the names already, that name tags should not be male or female. We went for like non-binary name tags. And also not only like typically German names, but from different cultures. I hope that answers your question.
Do you or STARS have any kind of social media presence where we can learn more about your future work?
Yeah, sure. I can put that in the chat. Of course. And you will recognize some of the photographs.
Meanwhile, people are thanking you and saying it was a lovely and educational lecture and an eye-opener.
That's good.
Someone is asking, in the Brazilian context, especially in high school, it is becoming increasingly common that a set of 4 class periods with the same teacher doesn't even exist. In this sense, do you think it's possible to apply a shorter version with preparation, role play, and reflection condensed into 50 minutes?
Into how many minutes?
Like 50.
50.
Having the...
Yeah, sure. Yeah. As one of my, to quote one of the experts that I did my initial work with, yes, but please do have a reflection, a thorough reflection of what happened. So if you are very limited in time, you rather skip the game and have the reflection. That is, of course, an exaggeration, but it shows how important the reflection is for the learning process. So yeah, sure, you could have like a 20-25 minute game. And of course, you would not immerse deeply in characters and roles, but you could still get a sense of what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, switch perspective, and just be, in the beginning for the preparation, it would be a bit top down, that you would be clear about the rules. They would not be able to work on the characters a lot, so they might just get their name and a sentence of who they are. Yeah, but I think it's possible.
Just from personal experience, we've been doing role plays where it's maybe like 3 minutes of role play and then like 20 minutes of reflection, and that can actually be quite potent too, if you have the right group that's up for that. So it's a very, very potent tool when it's activated and when people are opted in, as you described. Someone is asking, did any students or teachers express changes in how they felt about traditional learning exercises following the EduLarp experience?
Yes, in a sense that they said that EduLarp was a perfect tool to complement traditional learning exercises. So they would never completely change to just EduLarp. But they said that they would definitely embrace having EduLarp in their learning processes in the classrooms a few times a year. Yeah, because they observed a positive social climate in their classrooms. They observed that their relationship towards the students was different in a positive sense, that they were getting closer in a way because they had a shared positive experience now. And a third, the holistic experience, because school, at least in Bavaria, is still very cognitive, it's brain heavy, and to experience yourself and everybody else with all your senses and interacting non-verbally, that was something that they wished that their students to experience, yes.
I love what you had to say about the teacher and student experience, because so often we forget that that's a relationship dynamic that's occurring too. And one of the things that EduLarp is so good at is shifting up those social hierarchies that we talked about. So maybe there is more playfulness that's possible between teacher and student that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Somebody's asking, well, thank you for your presentation. Very much enjoyed the findings and insights you talked about. Love your approach of richness and asset to diversity of languages in the classroom. Did you, by any chance, hear from students about the impact of this EduLarp King on their perception over time after finishing the EduLarp?
I wish we had. No, unfortunately not. For different reasons, like the teacher had to go to another school. So she had to leave that class, and then we could not keep in touch with that specific class, unfortunately. But that would be so interesting to have follow-ups. We had follow-ups with other groups like a year later, and we asked them, like, what changes did you perceive? And they were mostly on a personal level regarding their like confidence, self-esteem, and also their verbal and non-verbal expression. So I would assume that we would have heard a lot about that and their perspective on their own languages, and how they perceived everybody else's language. But no, unfortunately not. But yeah, I hope I can give you an answer in the future.
Well, you were talking a second ago about inclusion, and it seems like a very culturally relevant practice that can actually lend to inclusion, where people can bring their own cultural experience into the classroom rather than being told this is what culture is and this is what you're supposed to be learning. Would you agree with that based on your observation of the students?
Very much so, definitely, yes. And that is such a, that empowerment comes very by surprise. And I think it would be super interesting to hear about EduLarp in different cultural contexts, because as I experienced school in Sweden, it was more open, more playful, more creative, and the students already had more ownership in regular traditional classrooms. And then it would be interesting to hear how they perceive EduLarp. Is that also empowering? And is that a culture, or is it just, well, as anything else? Yeah.
Do a research study on it. It would be very interesting, especially for these, like you have a pretty considerable sample size at this point. And a lot of these EduLarp interventions are maybe in one class or, you know, one teacher that's doing it over time. So when there's a large sample size where there's a lot of students, especially in the Swedish system, that have experienced EduLarp, then we can actually get some pretty interesting quantitative data as well, as, you know, maybe see some patterns over time. So,
yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a great project, definitely.
Maybe we can talk more about it. So I have some questions. You mentioned that some of the children would opt out briefly, but not opt out completely. What were some of the reasons that they chose to opt out?
Well, the real reasons, I don't know. Like, we always have what they tell us, right? What we could observe was that when it got really noisy, you know, like when we were having the party in Accused, you know, like we had music playing and everybody, like 30 people chatting at a time, then some people felt, whoa, this is overwhelming, that's too much. So this could be one reason, just, you know, too many impressions at once. Then another reason would be that in some scenes, they would not know what was going to happen. So we have intergalactic, a game taking place in outer space, and there are some interstellar pirates, and the group learns that, oh, there is a threat, like pirates are approaching. What can we do about it? And that threat, even though it was very in-game and very not close to home, still felt threatening to some. And they felt like, no, let me observe a little bit. And that's fine. And I'm so glad to be able to say that after these 53 cycles, we never lost a single student. So they always would rejoin, seeing that, yeah, it's a safe thing. And even though the pirates might be invading our ship, it's still safe to do that, to be part of the simulation.
Would you coach them back into the game, or would you just sort of let them have their overwhelm and until they sort of were able to re-engage themselves?
We would observe them, and then at some point in time, sometimes we would encourage them to rejoin, or mostly they would just quietly by themselves get back to their whatever group they were having, a family or and that is another design principle I did not mention too much today, but it's so important that they have at least one positive relationship, so somewhere they can go back to. It could be a family, it could be the factory in the example.
Like in my experience in doing organizing and safety work, people get overstimulated a lot. It might be bleed, like you were describing, maybe they feel actually threatened, even if it's, a fictional scenario, or there's just too many things going on and they're not sure what to engage with. And so sometimes just having that little push of, why don't you try this thread? This seems to interest you a lot. Or in this case, like, why don't you go to that person that, who's your best friend in the game? And that can sometimes give them that lifeline back into the fiction.
Yeah.
Can you give any examples of the opt-out mechanisms you practice with the students in advance? And how do you prevent quote unquote abuse of these mechanisms?
The second part, the abuse, which I guess could be that they opt out too much or all the time just to be silly. That never happened. Just because I think they might not be used to opting out of something in a school context. They usually do what they're being told to do. And some mechanisms would be, let me think, like shadowing your eyes like that and just retreat. And that would be a signal for everybody else that, well, okay, now I'm not my character anymore, chip. And then they would just stand back close to a wall and observe. And that needs to be rehearsed, because sometimes in the beginning we only told them, oh, this is what you can do, and then you cover your eyes and then you just leave, and nobody will ask you any questions. You will be safe and by yourself, but nobody would be doing it. Sometimes they would just approach us and say, well, I don't want to be part of that anymore. So we realized we have to rehearse, like everybody doing that, and making it a very natural thing to do, even the teachers. And then it worked. So that is one example.
So like having it be part of the workshop where they have this embodied sense of what it feels like, not just a cognitive understanding of it.
Exactly.
And I also noticed you were talking about sort of they can decide the level of participation that they want to go for. Are they playing a central role, or are they playing more of a tangential role? And that might help some people stay engaged as well, especially if they have performance anxiety. They can still be part of the game. They still have a place in the fiction, but they don't necessarily have to be the primary driver. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, definitely. And we also realized that they are reluctant to this. They don't really buy it. But when we just were saying, it's totally up to you how much you want to engage, they go like, yeah, okay, you can say that, but I don't believe you. But then once they realize this is how it is, even students who were opting for more like drawn back characters, they would engage totally. And just by knowing that it's their ownership and they always can decide taking a step back or forward, that would help.
You mentioned, I found so fascinating. In your data, you mentioned that content-related learning was so high. out of all of those scores, which is interesting because I've heard other EduLarp experts say that that's the one thing that's hardest to train, which is content mastery. And, kind of going back to the previous question about, traditional learning techniques, you were talking about how this needs to be paired with traditional learning techniques of some sort before and after to prepare them for that. So I was really interested in what your perception was of their learning in terms of this content familiarity or mastery. Is it that they perceive that they're learning it, or did you notice that they were actually learning it?
I noticed during the very game that they were using, for example, this medieval language. We had like posters set up in the classroom with certain expressions on how to greet each other in medieval German, and they were using those. And then in the reflection, we asked them, since it was one of our learning objectives, do you feel that you've learned something about medieval language? And they were like, yes. Then I think that students are trained on content knowledge, on perceiving content knowledge. It's not so much that they realize how much they were interacting and how much they were learning about themselves, how they express themselves. So that would be something that once it is introduced as a specific learning goal, like nonverbal interaction, for example, or social skills, to ask them specifically about that. How do you perceive any changes in that? But it's difficult because it's so difficult to measure.
We have to rely on self-reports, which, may or may not reflect what's actually happening. But yeah, I still think they're super valuable, because even if somebody believes that they've gained more self-confidence, as you mentioned, that's huge. It really is. It can mean a world of difference in terms of their ability to succeed in life, to pursue their goals.
Yes, and it can spark like a whole change of positive experience, because then in the school environment, they feel safer in the very subject with the teachers. So it can definitely be a grounds for transition and transformation.
Which is, of course, what we're trying to get to here is like, okay, what's the spark? Because the game isn't necessarily the point. It's great, it's wonderful, but like, what's the spark that then will jettison them into, different levels of achievement or different levels of self-worth, or whatever it is that the goals are. Expression, being able to, I love hearing about the students being able to express themselves so much more because they're writing about their characters. That's my experience as well. It's like, once I'm in character, then all of a sudden I have a lot to say.
Yeah, that's wonderful to see them engage so much without any constraints and without like taking away the pressure of having to perform in a certain way in order to get a certain grade. Taking away all that pressure makes even the teachers see whole different persons in their classroom. And I think this is why it's so valuable for teachers as well, that they suddenly see the person behind the student. Yeah, that's really great.
One very short final question. You mentioned games where everyone dies, so I'm super intrigued. Could you give us an example and let us know how the children responded to that?
Yeah, they respond in a positive way if everybody dies. But otherwise, they, as an accused, when not everybody dies, but like half of those being in jail, they feel it's unfair, but then they immediately realize, well, it was super unfair. Like the system at that time is so unfair, and you could be so blessed to live nowadays in a system that at least tries to establish like equal social positions in as good at you know what I mean, as much as possible. Yeah, I remember games where everybody dies. They were written by Leif Werkstan, and I felt like, wow, we can't do that in German classrooms. Maybe it would work in Sweden, but it couldn't work for German classrooms. And then we carefully tried it out, and it does. And I think the students are very used to fiction where dying characters, like even the good guys die. So it's not too heavy, and it adds a lot to their experience, like knowing that, okay, something has set an end for my character now. Mm.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. I'm just always so blown away by how organized your thought is and how procedural you can explain all of the steps while also going into so much rich depth. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone in the audience for listening. Bye-bye. Yeah, and please get in touch in case you want to embark on a new study, in case you want to share EduLarps. We're happy to share, even though I have to warn that we only have very few LARPs in English. They would be in German. Yeah, but still, we're happy to cooperate.